Hello and welcome to Monday Bagel, the podcast where we explore the evolving intersection of law, technology, and society. I'm your host, Michał Jackowski, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Ian McDougall, president of the Rule of Law Foundation and longtime General Counsel at Lexis Nexis, one of the most influential legal tech companies in the world. Ian, welcome. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
So can you share your journey into the legal tech space and how your role at LexisNexis has evolved over the years?
Yeah, sure. So to start with, I'm a barrister in the UK, which for those who don't know, is basically someone who's trained to be a court advocate. The barristers are known for wearing the white wigs and the black gowns, which they still do sometimes. And then I went in-house and really spent some time with technology companies before eventually, some over 20 years ago, I joined Lexis. Now, I think it's interesting because I joined Lexis at a time when it was going through a technology journey of its own, which was to go from being a publisher of legal books to being a provider of online information. Very, very different. Lots of interesting legal issues come about as a result of that. But the interesting journey, I think, for today's purposes, is that transformation from information on print to information on CD-ROM to information via the internet to information which is intelligently provided even before you ask for it. That would be the way to look at it, I think.
So that's a really compelling journey. I remember such the journey with Wolters Kluwer in Poland. Lex system was the first one, but we work now with LexisNexis.
Yeah.
So LexisNexis has been a pioneer in legal research tools. Does it integrate AI inside, and how has the integration of AI transformed?
I think that Lexis has been a legal technology innovator really since the 1970s, because my understanding is I wasn't around in the early 1970s at Lexis anyway. I was alive, but I wasn't working at Lexis. I believe that Lexis in the United States was the first commercially searchable database on the nascent internet.
Mm-hmm.
So right from the start of the kind of the internet age, Lexis has been a pioneer. But of course, trying to keep constantly up with and ahead of technology trends. So for years before the recent launch of generative AI, Lexis has been using very complicated machine learning technology for its database searches, natural language processing to enable ease of interaction with the user, and then extractive AI in its database, which for those who don't know is basically the ability to intelligently manage and retrieve information from a database. Then the introduction of kind of natural language searching, which again, all of these things are basically tools that enabled the reproduction of a piece of information that was in the database. This is basically what it is. And then, of course, most recently, Lexis's ability to be first to market with a comprehensive AI solution for lawyers was because of all this work that had gone on in the past. So generative AI could be built as a layer on top of the technology that was already there. And so what effectively the generative AI adds to the user is, instead of retrieving a chunk of the database like a search engine does, you're now generating new text, which is based on the database. And this is kind of the big leap. And I think it's a big leap in what I call all of the cognitive industries. Up until now, technology has focused a lot more on physical process. And so we've seen that in manufacturing and all other kinds of things. What generative AI, I think, does is now enable that kind of industrial revolution to take place in the cognitive industries, because it can produce new intellectual material.
So do you think LLMs, large language models, replace traditional legal research tools? Not only like LexisNexis, but different legal tools, like
Yeah.
traditional ones, or will it be a different, another layer, like you said,
That's
on the
yes.
tools?
Yeah. I think it's too simplistic to talk about things being replaced. I like to think of this about the evolution of the technology. So each development that's happened before now, let's take generative AI out of the question. What has it been that the legal technology companies have been doing? They have been trying to streamline the workflow of the lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
That's fundamentally what it is, to enable information, to enable other tools and the construction of documents to help with that workflow. This is another step on that journey, yeah, which helps the lawyer do what they were going to do, but helps them do it so much more efficiently and so much more quickly.
But GenAI allows new players to enter the market. Except for established platforms like LexisNexis, there are niche startups. A lot of new tools are being implemented every week or month
Yeah.
to the market.
Well, there's two things I would say to that. First of all, for 100 years, there have been new entrants into the legal market, right? So
you must have seen a lot of them.
that's right, yeah. And we've bought many of them too.
Okay.
That's not a new thing. But with regard to the legal market, what's absolutely crucial is having a quality curated database.
Mhm.
This is the absolutely crucial thing. Without it, you get ChatGPT,
Mhm.
right? Now, I don't wish to dismiss ChatGPT. I don't mean that, but what I mean is that ChatGPT is, to me, if you were going to ask it a legal question, it's the equivalent of walking into a bar and asking the first drunk person you meet, right? You might get a good answer. You might get a load of nonsense. You
Especially
can't be
if you choose
sure.
the proper bar.
But, yeah, that's right. But here's the thing. Think about it in terms of human intelligence. If you wanted a piece of legal advice, why would you ask the first person you meet in a bar, right? You wouldn't. You would go to someone who had been legally trained.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I see exactly the same issue with regard to a generative AI. If you want a legal question answered, you should go to a legally trained generative AI. If you want a medical question answered, you should go to a medically trained generative AI. Because the problem about an uncurated database is that there's a lot of nonsense which is treated equally by the large language model. It's treated with the same degree of rigor as the real information and data. And of course, in the open AI models, you've got all of the bias, the prejudices, all of the terrible things that are out there on the internet, which it is treating as part of its statistical model in producing the words. What I believe you're going to see
Mm-hmm.
as we go forward is people less and less interacting with a general AI model. What
Mm-hmm.
I think they're going to be interacting with is what's becoming known as agentic AI,
Mm-hmm.
which I prefer calling task-specific AI, which is what I'm describing. It says on the tin, if you want something specific, you go to a specifically trained piece of technology to do it. Now, underneath that, the layer underneath that may well be in part generative AI. I don't see how, if you want to rely upon it so that your career depends on it, yeah, why you would go to an open AI model.
So how do you envision the future of cooperating between human and AI, robots, machines, software systems?
So, well, with regard to the humans, the way I view this, I'll describe this by an analogy that I like to use. So, I'm old enough to remember when you were not allowed to take calculators into maths exams, right? Now, when this discussion started, or should we allow students to take calculators into maths exams? Oh my God, no one will ever need to know maths again, right? That's what they said. let's look exactly what happened. They took the calculator into the maths exam. The calculator did a lot of the basic work, and then the human took that and did something value added to it. Yeah. So if you kind of extrapolate that analogy, say, to the legal profession or whatever, some of the basic repeatable work that was being done by humans will be capable of being done by the AI models. But that doesn't remove the human, because what happens then is that if you are prepared to embrace this, the human moves up the value chain. The human takes the output of the AI and does something value added with that.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so that's how I see the relationship now of the humans and the AI as being exactly that same thing with the calculator and the mathematician. Yeah. Some of the base work is done for you. You take the output from the machine and you do something value added with that. That's lawyers going to be the case of managing someone's case, managing their legal affairs, yeah, interacting with the court, interacting with the other side, all of these kind of things, and utilizing the technology to enable them to devote more time to doing the value-added stuff.
I fully agree. I fully agree with you, but I'm a law firm partner, so I'm pretty interested how you, as a former general counsel,
Yeah.
how you envision in-house legal departments adopting AI. Should they lead the change, or should they wait for law firms they cooperate with to integrate these technologies?
Yeah.
Because I see different approaches.
Yeah, and so I'll have to sort of take a step back to answer that question, because we often use the term in-house legal departments
Hmm.
as a single kind of great big thing, in the same way that some people mistakenly say law firms,
Okay,
right? There are lots of varieties
there
of
are.
these kind of things, from the sole in-house lawyer, just like the sole legal practitioner, to the great big firms that have 1,000 or more people in their legal department. There's going to be a variety of different ways to look into this. I suggest that starting from the lower end up, if I can call it that without being disrespectful, to the, shall I say, the smaller end of the market, they ought to be looking at people like Lexis who have developed tools off the shelf. You simply take the tool off the shelf and you integrate what you do into that tool rather than the other way around. Yeah.
Okay.
So that would be the first thing. Now, some of the bigger firms will have more resource to be able to do things like looking at getting outside experts in to look at their processes. Yeah, running Lean Six Sigma projects or things like this, and looking into workflows, all kinds of different things. Because the right way to ask the question when you have the resource to do so is not how can I deploy this technology? It is what problem am I trying to solve? And what is the appropriate technology for the problem that I'm trying to solve? That would be the way that I would see both ends of that scale going. It's not a case, I think it's a mistake, especially if you have a lot of resource, to go around saying, oh, there's this shiny new toy, how can I use it?
Hmm.
It's much, much better for you to have the resource to look into what your workflows look like, look into what your capacities are, look into what your demands are, and then come up with a plan that streamlines that and delivers what your client stroke customer actually want out of the service, rather than to be someone who is looking for the next new shiny toy to deploy.
That's insightful point, but I hear that despite the way you should implement technology in the in-house department as well. Well, this is what I
Yeah,
hear when I listen to you.
that's right.
You
Yeah,
choose the
but
best
the
way,
point is,
but
yeah, but the point is that it's no good implementing technology, yeah, when it doesn't actually do anything for you. It doesn't
yeah.
actually solve the problem that you have to deal with, yeah.
Hmm.
So of course, it's perfectly possible for anyone to buy any kind of technology, and then it will sit there not being used because it's not solving any problem. It's not part of a workflow. And when you get a piece of technology that isn't fully integrated into someone's workflow, they will find reasons to go around it.
Okay.
Right? They'll find reasons not to use it. And so it's much, much better to have a systematic approach. As I said, I'm talking at scale now, because I think at the smaller end of the market, you take off-the-shelf products and you integrate what you do into what the product does, rather than the other way around.
You touch one of the challenges in-house, but also law firms, legal teams face when implementing AI solutions. What are others? Can you see other challenges, and how you can overcome them?
Yeah. So the sort of worry that I have is that either law firms or in-house people see this as a panacea, a solving of all of their problems. All their problems will go away. All you have to do is do something with AI, and then everything will be better. And I think that's a mistaken way to look at it. So, as I say, I think the right way to approach this is to think first about the problem you're trying to solve. Think first about what the demand is. So, for example, if I am running a in-house legal team, and most of what we do is customer contracts, for example, obviously that ought to be my focus. Yeah. It's no good that being my focus, for example, if I am, for example, running a legal department in a place where I don't have much of that to do, and most of my requirement is kind of regulatory compliance issues. So, I think the mistake that's going to be made, and it will be made, of course, because it's been made at every new technology point in history, is that people will first rush and try and develop something new for themselves. And then they'll find out that, there was no point in doing that at all, and that will be scrapped. They'll have wasted the money but learned another lesson. I am old enough to have remembered this when word processors came out. I remember when word processors first coming out, some very big law firms started to try to develop their own word processor programs. Yeah. I can remember this. I saw it happen. Yeah. Well, of course, can you think of anything more ridiculous than a law firm trying to develop its own word processor program? I once said at a conference recently to a partner who was from a very large law firm, "How many company cars do you have?" And he said, "Oh, I'm guessing about 1,000 across the world." Yeah. I said, "Why don't you manufacture cars?" And when you put it into that context, you start to see how a lot of mistakes are going to be made, because suddenly, and for reasons which remain a mystery to me, law firms suddenly think that they are now technology firms.
What do you think about the skill set challenge? My perception is that lawyers using AI treat it as a panacea, as you mentioned, but also lose their critical thinking very often, accept it easily, especially when not trained about legal tech literacy. So there is I think there is a gap in legal
right.
education.
Yes, absolutely right. And it starts from the universities. Yeah. This is increasingly going to have to be a part of a lawyer's degree course. Yeah. Because it's going to be such a fundamental part of how they do the job. I think that's going to be very important. And then, of course, we're going to have a situation where law firms might have to run their own training programs as well. Because, of course, the interaction with the technology is going to be absolutely crucial. I'll talk about another analogy, if you don't mind, that I like to use that illustrates the point. So I like to say that in London in the 1800s, to be a taxi driver, you had to know how to manage a horse. Right? There was literally no possible way you could be a taxi driver in London if you didn't manage a horse. And then the internal combustion engine came along. Yeah. Now suddenly knowledge of a horse is completely useless. Yeah. But strictly speaking, is knowledge of an internal combustion engine useful? Not really. The skill that's now required is how to interact. What levers do I pull and push in order to get the outcomes that I want? Yeah. And so whilst, we can spend ages talking about so-called auditing AI systems, which is a nonsense, and understanding how they work, that's helpful. The important thing is going to be learning how to interact with it, and then learning how not to be what I call a tech zombie, which is just a passive recipient of whatever this thing is throwing at you, which is what some unfortunate lawyers have found when they use ChatGPT and put the output straight into court pleadings, and suddenly discovered to the cost of their careers that's not a good thing to do. So it is going to be, I think, education-wise, about blending the skills that are required with the technology that's required.
And how would you approach it as a general counsel? How would you implement it? How would you do it practically if you were responsible for this field?
Yeah, well, for the education side of things, I encouraged all of my team to be curious, to be inquisitive, ask questions, find out about this stuff. We had some training by our technology people on what is now called prompt engineering. Yeah.
Okay.
What is the best way to ask the right questions with the right set of materials to get the answers that you want? And one of the reasons why I think my career developed as broadly as it did at Lexis is because I never stopped trying to find out about stuff. Yeah. I go speak to the technology folks. How does that work? Why are you doing it that way? Yeah. What other ways? What ways did you discard? How are you measuring that? How do you know what's going on under the hood, as they say in the US? So I encourage all in-house lawyers, to be inquisitive, to keep asking questions. You find usually that people like talking about what they're doing. And so, they'll be very, very forthcoming. And what that means then is that the more kind of background information that you have, the more holistic legal advice you can give, the more applicable and appropriate legal advice it is.
More and more young lawyers especially come to me and ask if that real tech knowledge, tech fluency is required in the future legal world. What do you think about it? Will lawyers have to be coding, or just curiosity is enough?
Yeah, I don't think they'll have to be coding as such because, again, to use the analogy of the way that computers have developed through the years, if you remember when the what they used to call the disk operating systems used to come out, you'd start up your computer and the only thing you'd see was a blank screen and a blinking cursor, right? And you had to be kind of semi code literate in order to make the computer do anything. Yeah. But what developed, of course, were user interfaces that were an additional level between you and what you wanted the computer to do. And so, again, what I think we will see here is not the requirement for programming skills, but the requirement to know how to interact with the technology well. And that's what I think people should remain curious about, which is how can I interact with this technology so that I can make it do really good things? And that shouldn't be too difficult for the younger generations because they spend all of their time doing most that with technology. So that this is playing into their strengths already.
Yeah, so I repeat it that it's a great advantage of the young generation because they are immersed in the technology since their birth.
This is another reason why I think we're going to see an increase in the speed of development in the legal industry, because we're increasingly seeing the younger generations coming into positions of decision making and authority who are much, much more willing to try out new technologies, who are much more willing to embrace and engage with these technologies than generations like me and before, who still remember that the word file used to mean a folded piece of paper.
You give a lot of hope to junior lawyers, I think. One last question. Looking ahead, what innovation or trends do you anticipate will shape the intersection of AI, maybe technology, but mostly AI, and legal practice in the next 5 years? I know it's a long distance, but what's your
Yeah, I mean,
prediction?
that's obviously, if I really knew that, I'd be setting up a company and floating it on the stock exchange. But in reality, I think one of the biggest changes is going to be in the nature of the way jobs are done. There are going to be some new jobs that appear. All industrial revolutions produce new jobs that we never imagined before. And I think this is the fourth industrial revolution. What we are going to see is the emergence of new jobs that you and I can't even imagine existed now. In exactly the same way as if 40 years ago, who would have imagined that a company that produces a search engine would be employing 90,000 people around the world? Nobody could possibly imagine it. So that sort of thing is going to happen. But the thing that's going to be really difficult, I think, for many of the more senior members of the legal profession is going to be the changes that come about in the nature of the way that they do their job. Many lawyers have established a status for themselves out of the intellectual capability of remembering law. Right?
Yeah.
The ability to cite a case from memory is very impressive. It sounds intelligent. It's going to be the equivalent of knowledge of the horse for the taxi driver. Yeah, because the computer can do it way better than you can. So how do you kind of feel about your loss of intellectual status when you're dealing with a computer that's way better than you are? That's interesting. The other thing, of course, is going to be will we finally see the end of per hour billing, hourly billing? This is, I think, going to be really something that people have to start grappling with. I know, the old thing about Mark Twain saying the reports of my death are greatly exaggerated, but and that's right. But there's also another story as well, which is the story of Crying Wolf. And we know how that story ended. And so I think that we are going to see the end of hourly billing. I think we're going to see a big challenge in the legal profession of the conversion of hourly billing to value billing. And a lot of people are going to maybe struggle with that transformation because they're not used to it. They haven't run their businesses in that way. They've run their businesses in a way that's totally risk-free. Yeah. No matter how long this project takes, I'm going to charge you for it. Yeah.
Okay.
It could go on for 20 years. Doesn't matter to me. Yeah. I'm going to keep charging you by the hour. So every bit of cost and expense and time that I incur is coming back to you. Yeah. But in a value billing scenario, yeah, that doesn't work. Yeah. Now you've got to understand about your cost base, about the average kind of cost of a particular kind of case. That involves deploying data in order to make data-driven decisions about how you price. Yeah. Well, these are skills which a lot of lawyers are going to have to learn at some point.
That's a great prediction. I would love to have a second episode how to implement it in practice, maybe in some time.
Yeah.
Thank you for this deep and engaging conversation. I love your examples and I love your insights into how Lexis is evolving with AI, how AI is transforming legal industry. Thank you very much for being here.
The pleasure. Thank you very much.
And to our listeners, if this episode sparked your interest, please subscribe to Monday Bagel, leave us a review, share this episode with your colleagues and friends. You can watch more conversation like this on YouTube and come back. Bye-bye.